So, without further ado, please welcome Professor Elizabeth Loftus.
Well, thanks for that very nice introduction, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here at Goldsmiths and have a chance to talk to such a wide variety of people, faculty, students, high school students, public, members of the public, about some of the work that I and my collaborators have done in the area of memory and memory distortion. And I'd have to say that as somebody who is interested in memory and memory distortion, I go through life collecting memory stories wherever I can find them. And I found a really good one. I think actually one of my graduate students turned me on to a couple of years ago, the memory of Tony Blair in his memoir talking about his memory of meeting the Queen. He says that the Queen said to him, this is a very significant memory for him, "You are my 10th Prime Minister. The first was Winston. That was before you were born." But the issue about Tony Blair's memory is this. About 4 or 5 years before he was writing his memoir and telling the world about his memory of meeting the Queen, there was a film called The Queen, in which the screenwriter created made-up dialogue where the Tony Blair character is meeting the Queen, and the Queen says, "You are my 10th Prime Minister, Mr. Blair. My first was Winston Churchill." So is it possible here that Tony Blair saw the film, and later on, years later, when he's writing his memoir, he remembers this scene from the film rather than something that actually happened to him in real life? Peter Morgan, the screenwriter, puts forth a few hypotheses. He says it's possible Blair imagined the scene perfectly, which seemed unlikely, or Blair had, quote, "one gin and tonic too many" and confused the scene in the film with what had actually happened. And although I can't fully figure out this example, at least one of the hypotheses is that he did confuse the film and the scene with something that actually happened. And I'm willing to entertain other hypotheses for future times when I might tell people about this experience. Mostly I'm pointing out the memory mistakes, embarrassing as they have been, of U.S. politicians, not British ones. And so to show you a few more examples from my wonderful collection, this last year we had a significant election in the United States for the U.S. presidency. And Mitt Romney was the leading candidate for the Republican Party. And he did a lot of campaigning against President Obama to try to win the election, which, as we know, he did not win. One of the things he talked about on the campaign trail was his memory of a very significant event in his life, called the Golden Jubilee. The Golden Jubilee was a celebration in Detroit, Michigan, of the 50th anniversary of the automotive industry in the United States. It was a really big deal because the automotive industry was really a big deal, especially in Michigan. And so Romney's memory, as he was campaigning, he was talking about what things looked like. There were parades on the street. Here's an actual photograph from the event. He says that he was about 4 years old, that his dad, who was a famous politician before him, was the Grand Master of the Golden Jubilee, that he remembered Woodward Street, the main street where the parade traveled, was painted in gold, all this really rich detail. There was just one little problem, and that is the Golden Jubilee occurred on June 1st, 1946, 9 months before Romney was born. So while we could say that he might have been conceived at the time, it is inconceivable that he was actually there. He has not provided an explanation yet, but just to show you the bipartisan nature of my collection, the Democratic candidate for the U.S. presidency ultimately she would become the Secretary of State when she lost when she did lose out. But she was running for the Democratic candidacy against President Obama in 2008, and she was campaigning very aggressively. And one of the stories she liked to tell about her past is the story of this harrowing trip she took to Bosnia. She said, I landed under sniper fire. There was supposed to be some kind of greeting ceremony there at the airport, but instead we just had to run with our heads down to get to our vehicles, to get to our base. Now, I don't know what Hillary was thinking, but she did go to Bosnia. But she didn't go by herself. She went with other people, and some of them were taking photographs. And so here is a photograph of the landing in Bosnia that occurred in 1996, the one time she went. She's being greeted by children. She's there with her daughter Chelsea, in the days when Chelsea had curly hair. It was a very peaceful ceremony. So what is going on here? Well, the pundits had a field day with this. One of them gave her 4 Pinocchios because there was no corkscrew landing, there was no sniper fire, there was no canceled airport reception, and she was not the first lady to go into a war zone. So, well, Hillary was confronted with this evidence, and at least she had the courage to step up and provide an explanation. And here's what she said. She said, I made a mistake. I had a different memory. I made a mistake. That proves I'm human, which for some people is a revelation, she said. So what I love about these examples is all this experience, all this training, all these IQ points, all that Yale Law School degree in the case of Hillary, or the Harvard degree in the case of Mitt Romney, and I'm not sure what degree in the case of Tony Blair, it doesn't seem to protect you from having false memories. And, most of the time when we have false memories, they can be pretty minor, or they can be somewhat embarrassing if you happen to be a politician running for a significant office and you get caught. But I tend to focus my interest in false memories on what happens in legal cases. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about a couple of different classes of cases. The first class of case are the hundreds and hundreds of people who've been convicted of crimes that they didn't do. They've been convicted of crimes and they serve 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years, and now new advances in DNA technology have enabled testing which has proven that they are actually innocent. And these individuals and their cases have been analyzed in a recent new book called Convicting the Innocent by a law professor named Brandon Garrett. And when Brandon Garrett analyzes the causes of the wrongful convictions in this collection of DNA exoneration cases, he has shown something that actually many of us in the field of psychology and memory have known for some time, that the major cause of wrongful convictions is faulty human memory, faulty eyewitness testimony. You see in the red bar on the left, responsible in more than 3/4 of these cases. But I've also been interested in a very different type of case than these DNA exoneration cases. And the more recent cases are the repressed memory accusations. To let you know what I mean by a repressed memory accusation, let me tell you just a brief story about a father and a daughter who were involved in a repressed memory accusation. The father, whom you're looking at, was an executive with the Mondavi Winery in Northern California. He was a very successful businessman. He was making something like $400,000 a year. He lived in a beautiful house. He had a terrific family. His world came crashing down when his daughter Holly, whom you're also looking at, went into therapy. And there she discovered something she didn't know before, namely that her father raped her between the ages of 5 and 16, many, many rapes, numerous forced sex with the family dog, all allegedly buried into her unconscious until the therapy made her aware of this. And as I have analyzed this case and many cases like this, and the research that is sometimes used to bolster the claims of repressed memory, I just have to say that, in my opinion, there is no credible scientific support for the notion that memories can be massively repressed in this way. This notion is something that Richard McNally from Harvard has called a pernicious piece of folklore. And yet these cases have made their way into litigation. In the case of the Ramona family, the daughter sued the father for abusing her. And what made the case really famous, and why the couple ended up on the cover of the Los Angeles Times Sunday magazine, is because in an unusual move, the father turned around and sued the therapist for planting false memories in the mind of his daughter. He was awarded $500,000 by a jury. Her case was dismissed. And as I enter these cases as an expert or a consultant and see these, sometimes quite bizarre recollections being introduced in these cases, I was prompted not long ago to rewrite the solemn oath that witnesses take when they get on the stand. Here's my idea of a more apt oath. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, or whatever it is you think you remember? So far this hasn't caught on, but it doesn't mean that I don't keep trying. So we, over the years, have developed a couple of paradigms for studying memory that I think map into these two classes of cases. One paradigm, which now we might call the misinformation paradigm, kind of maps onto that first type of case where there really is a murder, there really is a rape or a robbery, but someone's memory for some of the details goes awry, and that's how you end up with the wrong person being identified and convicted. And to map onto this kind of situation, the paradigm involves showing people an event of some sort, a simulated crime or accident, exposing them to some new information, post-event information that might be misleading in some way, and then testing them to see what they themselves remember about the event at the end of the session. But to tap into this other kind of situation, like the Ramona situation, where we don't think anything happened, but highly suggestive psychotherapy procedures, including in her case the use of sodium amytal, the so-called truth serum, which it's not, have led these patients to develop these really rich false memories. We needed a slightly different paradigm. And so there, what we do is there's no event to begin with, but we just ply people with suggestions about the past, and then we test people to see what they themselves remember about their childhood or about their more recent past. So to show you an example of some materials that we've been using over the last few years in a misinformation study, our subjects might see an event unfold. I've got a few scenes from the event. They are watching a woman walk down the street. A lot of things happen to this woman. Most notably, in the middle of the scene, there's a guy who approaches her, bumps into her, causing her to drop her belongings. He leans over, pretending he's helping her, and he reaches into her handbag, pulls out her wallet, and slips it into his jacket pocket. More things happen to this woman. Eventually, she notices her wallet is gone. She starts to talk to other people to try to figure out what to do. Afterwards, just like happens sometimes in real life, our subject witnesses are exposed to a version of the events ostensibly provided by another person. And that version of the event might be mostly accurate, but might contain a few little bits of misinformation. So here we see that this other witness is getting to the part of the story where the man bumped into the girl, reached into her handbag and pulls out the wallet and sticks it in his pants pocket. And more things are recounted by this other witness. And now our witness, our main witness, who actually saw the guy put the wallet in the jacket pocket, but got exposed to misinformation that it was the pants pocket. There's your true information and misinformation. Now the subject is that, what do you remember seeing yourself? Where did you see that man put the wallet after he took it out of the handbag? And they have to answer the question. So this research on the misinformation effect follows work that was done long ago in the 70s, where we, for example, showed people a simulated accident where a car goes through an intersection with a stop sign, and by asking a simple leading question that insinuates it was a yield sign, or for you a give way sign, we get lots and lots of people to believe and remember they saw a scene with a yield sign instead of a stop sign. And this is now known as the misinformation effect. So I want to show you a little bit about another piece of work that I've been involved in. This work is not yet published. It says here under revision. What this really means is it's between rejections, but we do have a lot of hope for it. And it was done with a couple of graduate students, Maya and Julie, and my colleague Don Hoffman from UC Irvine. And in order to give you a feel for what it's like to be a subject in this work, what I'd like to try to do is just a little demonstration here, and we'll see if it works. And I hope you'll just go with the flow and don't say anything out loud, but I'm going to show you some faces, and then I'll ask you some questions about them. So this is your study phase. Okay, now in our experiments with these materials, there'd be many more faces, and we'd let some time pass. We'd have a longer retention interval. I don't have the luxury of, I don't want to use up my whole time with you doing that, and so instead we're going to quiz you right now. And for this quiz, I'm going to show you a pair of faces, and you just have to think to yourself, but don't say anything out loud, just think to yourself, did I see the one on the left or the one on the right? So you don't really have to write anything down because it's just a quick quiz. Think to yourself, left or right? Think to yourself, left or right? So in our experiments with these materials, we might have more quiz trials, more time would pass. I don't have the luxury of that, so we're going to go right into a final test with you. And what I'm going to do now, and just so we can all see how each other might be feeling, I don't want you to say anything, but I'm going to ask you to raise your hand and vote for the face that you saw in the study phase. So how many people in the study phase remember seeing the one on the left? Raise your hand. Okay, we can all look around. Look at all those hands that are up. It looks like most of the room. How about the one on the right? Raise your hand. Any hands up? Well, we have like 2 hands. Are you feeling a little strange right now? Yeah, I think you can see there's an overwhelming preference, except for the 2 of you who picked the one on the right, for the one on the left. How about this one? Vote if you saw the one on the left in the study phase. Any hands? Not a single hand that I can see. How about the one on the right? Vote if that's... Look around. See how easy this test is? I mean, overwhelmingly, you are voting for the one on the right. How many saw the one on the left in the study phase? Raise your hand. I see a whole bunch of hands. How about the one on the right? I see a whole bunch of hands. And then I see a bunch of people, not the wimps, not voting because you don't want to be wrong. Well, what's going on here? You had an overwhelming preference for the first 2 test trials, but now you're split. You can't all be right. So a good chunk of you are wrong. And you're wrong because I made you wrong. I made you wrong right here in the middle of a lecture on false memories. How did I do it? I showed you a series of faces, 1, 2, and 3. I then tested you, the final test pairs where you voted. For the first face, the correct answer is the one on the right. Sorry, left. You were overwhelmingly voting for him. The correct answer for the second face is the one on the right. You overwhelmingly were voting for him. The correct answer for the third is the one on the right, and that's where you were split. Now you might want to say to yourself, well, wait a minute, maybe those last two are just more similar to each other. That's why we got confused. But that's not the case, because the algorithm for creating these pairs of faces was the same for all three of those pairs. The internal features were altered, the external features were kept the same. These faces are equally similar to each other. So any mistakes that you made on that third test trial is not because those faces are more similar. The reason you made a mistake is because of what I did during the retention interval, during the phase that we might call the quiz phase. For the first phase, I showed you a true face, the true face, paired with some completely novel one. And as you sat there silently, you said, I saw the one on the right. For the second face, we didn't quiz you at all. And for the third face, I showed you an altered face alongside a completely novel one. And as you sat there, you said to yourself, I saw the one on the left. And then later on during the final test, you stuck with that altered face, even though the true face is essentially staring you in the face. Many people did not recognize it as something that they had seen before. And so this work is showing that a post-event activity which induces subjects to pick a wrong face or pick a wrong person, which happens a lot in real cases, an activity which induces someone to pick a wrong person can affect the memory of the witness, can affect their ability to accurately identify the right person. And then we have further experiments designed to tease apart whether you actually have to pick the wrong face or is mere exposure to a wrong face enough to produce this impairing effect of memory. We have a news program in the U.S. that's very popular, television news, called 60 Minutes. And 60 Minutes recently did a story on a wrongful conviction case. It's one of the most famous wrongful conviction cases in the United States for reasons that will, I think, become evident. A college student, university student named Jennifer Thompson was raped one day in her apartment while she was in college. And the person she identified as her rapist was an African American named Ronald Cotton. She identified Ronald Cotton. She testified at his trial. She was a very impressive, compelling victim witness, and he was easily convicted. Now jump ahead. DNA testing is done, and it proves that Ronald Cotton was innocent, and the real rapist was another man named Bobby Poole. So 60 Minutes got interested in this case. Why? Because of what happened after the DNA testing revealed that Ronald Cotton was innocent. The detective called up Jennifer Thompson, said, I have to come over and talk to you about something. It was years after the conviction. The detective said, I'm here to tell you that it wasn't Ronald Cotton who raped you. It was another man named Bobby Poole. And Jennifer felt so horrible. She thought about this for a while, and she said, could I possibly meet him so that I could ask for his forgiveness? And so she met him, and she asked him to forgive her. And he forgave her. And the two of them became friends. And they started going around on a speaking mission around the United States, talking about their story, what had happened to them, and advocating for reforms in the procedures that the legal system uses to extract eyewitness testimony. And they wrote a book It's really a fascinating book called Picking Cotton that tells the story from their two different perspectives and sort of these periods of their lives interleaved together. And that's why 60 Minutes did a feature on their case. And I was interviewed by the journalist for 60 Minutes for this program. And as part of the whole program and the process, I did the experiment with her, the demonstration that I did with you. And when she got to these two faces and had to say which one she saw in the study phase, she just looked at them for the longest time, and then she said, you know, I am baffled, and she went ahead and picked the wrong face. So for all of you in this room who picked the wrong face, I just want you to know you're in excellent company with one of our most accomplished investigative journalists. When I talk about this particular study, you know, I like the study. It's you know, it's we've done now, you know, maybe 15 or 20 separate experiments with these faces, but I can see the criticism that they're somewhat artificial. They don't capture the essence of what happens with a real crime witness or victim, where first of all there's usually just, you know, mostly one perpetrator, not a whole bunch of faces to keep track of, and it's usually a very stressful, arousing situation. And so wouldn't it be nice to have a study that captured those aspects of the situation? Of course, there's a very good example done by Tim Valentine that I think sort of nicely captures those aspects, a study in which the subjects were people who were visiting the London dungeon, and it is a stressful experience when those scary creatures, you know, pop out and look like they're going to attack you. And so he's done some wonderful work in that setting. But the study I want to tell you about, which we just published about a month ago, is a study that's unusual because of its unusual subjects. The subjects are military personnel, U.S. military personnel, who are being trained in survival school. They are learning what it's going to be like if they are ever captured as prisoners of war. My access to this group of interesting subjects comes because of a collaboration with Charles Morgan, a psychiatrist, who's been studying these soldiers, primarily interested in, you know, the health consequences and how they cope with this very stressful survival school. He published his first paper on the survival school subjects back in 2004. And to tell you a little more about survival school, it's called SERE. It's for Survive, Evade, Resist, and Escape. And what these soldiers are learning to do is how to evade the enemy, how to escape if they're hunted down, how to resist if they're captured, imprisoned, or tortured. They will be captured in this exercise, and they're thrown into a mock prisoner of war camp. It looks something like that. They are hooded, they're strapped together, they're stripped of their identities, the kinds of things that would happen to them if they're ever really captured. They're thrown into these little cells with these third world toilets and no toilet paper. And they're extracted by helicopter, which is what's going to happen to them if they're being held in a jungle area where it's too dense for a helicopter to land. And eventually they are rescued, and there is an absolute flood of emotion. So Morgan himself has measured the cortisol levels of these soldiers in a prior study. The stress hormone levels are very high in these subjects who've gone through this experience. They're as high, as you can see in red, as the cortisol levels associated with other kinds of activities that are known to be stressful for people, like skydiving for the first time, shown in green. I came across a memoir not long ago that really, I think, adds some really interesting color to what it is like for these soldiers. I'm reading this memoir, and all of a sudden, the author is talking about having gone through the SERE experience. He says in an interrogation he was slammed against the wall, His interrogator slapped me with his open hand at least 6 times. Stars appeared in my vision. My gums and mouth quickly filled with blood, and he underwent the waterboard torture. He said he left the SERE school a few pounds lighter with an incredible fear of being captured by the enemy. So that's what this experience is like. It's about as stressful an experience that somebody might have. And I managed to talk Morgan into putting some misinformation into the experience of these soldiers. So let me just tell you a little bit more about what happens in this study. After classroom instruction, the soldiers then go out into the field and they spend 4 days trying to evade capture. And it's very stressful out there, and they're being hunted down, and eventually they're going to be captured, and they're going to be taken, and they're going to be put into that prisoner of war camp, and they're going to spend early on 30 minutes in an interrogation with somebody who slaps them around, stars in their eyes, gums filled with blood. And after that, some of these soldiers are going to be exposed to misinformation. This study is actually much more complicated. It has many conditions. I'm just telling you about 2 of them. So some of the misinformation soldiers are interrogated in this way. Look at this photo of your interrogator. Did he give you anything to eat? Did he give you a blanket? Did he let you speak to anyone else? But the trick is, this is a photograph of a completely different person. And that completely different person might not even resemble the actual perpetrator. And then in this particular study, the subjects were given a 9-person photo array. It's what we call a target absent array. The real guy isn't there, but the photo shown to the misinformation subjects is in the number 2 position. So what do these trained soldiers do? Well, if they weren't given any misinformation, 53% of the time they go ahead and pick someone. Of course, they're all wrong because it's a target absent lineup. The perpetrator isn't there. Rarely are they picking that key foil. In your example, it would have been the number 2 person in the number 2 position. But what about the soldiers that were fed the misinformation? Now, 91% of the time, they go ahead and pick somebody out of the target absent array. They're, of course, all wrong. And invariably, the one they're picking is that foil photo. And so this study has shown that these highly trained soldiers who are undergoing a highly stressful, arousing interaction with somebody will make false identifications. They do it with high confidence. Exposing them to misinformation makes them do more of it. And I will tell you, as we were leading up to the period where we're thinking about, where we're submitting this for publication and getting the paper ready for publication, I did have some nagging concerns of kind of feelings of worry. Aren't we putting a recipe out there for how some bad people can do really awful things to other people, and then in this simple way tamper with the memory of the witnesses as to who committed those bad acts? And in the end, we finally came down on the side of believing that it's better not to bury the information, but to get it out there so people can be aware of these kinds of phenomena, maybe develop some ways to defend against them. Okay, this is just another example of ongoing work on something that in psychology is now called the misinformation effect. When you get misinformation about some experience that you've had in the past, it can sometimes supplement your memory, but sometimes distort, contaminate, or transform that memory. And now I want to move on to this other kind of more recent paradigm, the one that maps into some of these repressed memory accusations of the sort that were made in the Ramona case. Remember, here we believe that there may be no event at all that happened, but somehow suggestive therapy and the procedures in that therapy were leading some of these patients to develop not just a memory that the car went through a yield sign instead of a stop sign, but very rich false memories. And so what we wanted to do was study that process. And the first obstacle we had was, what kind of memory do you want to plant in the minds of people? As many people in this room know, there are research ethics committees that review proposed research that will involve human beings to make sure that the research will not harm the human beings. It didn't seem very likely that the research ethics committees were going to allow us to take our subjects and try to convince them that Daddy raped them for 11 years and forced them into sex with the family dog. We needed an analog, and that's when we eventually came up with the idea, why don't we try to get people to believe and remember that when they were a kid, they were lost in a shopping mall, that they were frightened, crying, and ultimately rescued by an elderly person and reunited with the family. And in the first study that I published with Jackie Pickrell, my former graduate student, we showed that you could plant this memory in a few suggestive interviews in a quarter of our sample of adults. Well, the study got criticized. Getting lost is so common. Show us you can do this with something that would, be less common than being lost in a public place. And so other researchers stepped in, and they did similar studies using a similar format of suggestion and getting people to remember, for example, that they had an accident at a family wedding where they spilled punch accidentally over the parents of the bride. This study done in the state of Washington and succeeded with about a quarter of their subjects. In a Canadian study, they used this technique to convince people that as children they had been a victim of a serious indoor accident or a vicious animal attack. They were getting really good because they could get a complete or partial false memory out of more than half of their subjects. And in a study done in Tennessee, people were led, about a third of them, to believe and remember that as children they nearly drowned and had to be rescued by a lifeguard. So these were some of the earliest studies that showed that you could plant, with a pretty strong form of suggestion, these really rich false memories. And then later work done by us and other investigators showed you didn't need this really strong form of suggestion to plant these false memories. Other techniques modeled after what we saw going on in some psychotherapy circles, other techniques could also lead people to false memories, like guided imagination. Remember this happening? Let's just imagine how it might have happened. Dream interpretation. I've listened to your story about your dream, and I think what that dream means is maybe you were sexually abused as a child. Hypnosis. Exposing people to other people's memories. Plying them with false information. I'll give you some examples of that. And exposing them to doctored photographs. These were all ways in which we could pretty readily get people to develop memories of whole events that never happened. I love that doctored photograph example. The first study on doctored photographs was done a few years ago by a former postdoc of mine, Marianne Gary, and her student Kim Wade, who's now teaching here in Britain. And not too long ago, one of our online magazines that's very popular, Slate.com, did a big long article called The Memory Doctor. And it's all about a lot of this research that I'm telling you about now and more. And in anticipation of running this great big long article, they decided to do an experiment with their online readers. And so they presented their online readers with some public photographs, like this photograph of President Obama shaking the hand of the president of Iran. You remember seeing that when it came out? And many subjects said, well, yeah, I did. Or, well, how about this one? You remember seeing the photograph of President Bush, the former president, vacationing with the famous baseball legend Roger Clemens on the Bush Ranch during Hurricane Katrina? Remember that? People, some people said, yeah, I do remember that. They couldn't have seen these photos because they were created with Photoshop. The Bush-Clemens vacation photo, actually someone else was with Bush on the ranch during Hurricane Katrina, but Clemens' photo was Photoshopped into the scene. And our president never shook the hand of the president of Iran. He was shaking someone else's hand in the photo, but the Iranian president's photo was Photoshopped into the scene. And yet many of the subjects, of the 5,000 subjects that Slate.com was able to run in this study in 1 week, it's a psychologist's dream, did say yes, they do remember seeing that photo. The light blue bar in the middle shows you 15% for the Bush-Clemens vacation, and more than 25% said, yes, I saw that photo of that Obama handshake. And they don't just say, yeah, I saw it. They're comment boxes so they can say more about what they remember and experienced at the time they saw the photo. Moreover, we just got our hands on the Slate data, and recently with my graduate student published a kind of an interesting finding from these data just a month or so ago, where your political orientation influences the likelihood that you are to accept a suggestion and develop a false memory. So the conservative Republicans were more likely to develop the false memory about the Obama handshake, something that would make the Democrat Obama look bad. And the liberals were somewhat more likely, the liberal Democrats, somewhat more likely to respond to the suggestion, develop a false memory of the Bush vacationing during Hurricane Katrina, something that would make the Republican Bush be looking in a bad light. And I think that what this study more generally tells us is that we are somewhat more likely to accept suggestions and to develop false memories when it fits with some sort of prior beliefs or expectations or feelings that we already have. I told you that people will give sometimes very elaborate details around their recollection of these made-up photos. So one person who said, oh yeah, I saw that Obama photo, that Obama handshake, says, I do remember Fox, a very conservative news program, freaking out about this. They said it made America look weak. And one of the subjects who said, oh yeah, I saw Clemens there with Bush on the ranch. I really hated the fact that while Bush is entertaining a baseball legend, the Astrodome is being used as a makeshift hotel. So they'll elaborate on these recollections with a lot of detail that might make their recollection appear to be very credible and convincing, despite the fact that we here know how the sausage was made. So I get a lot of criticism of my work and from people who don't like the message. And one of the criticisms, not so much about the doctored photo work, because there we know it's a complete fabrication, but at least with some of the other studies, Lost in the Mall, witnessing demonic possession, people say, maybe it really happened. Maybe the parent forgot, and what your suggestive interviewing is doing is pulling out a true memory rather than planting a false one. This, of course, is what the therapists think they're doing in the questionable therapy, that they're pulling out true memories, not planting false ones. And so to respond to this concern, I and my students have thought, well, why don't we plant some false memories for things that would be implausible or even impossible. And so in the implausible category, in a study headed by my former grad student, Sherry Berkowitz, we planted the false memory that when you were a kid, you went on a trip to Disney, and there you had your ear disturbingly and persistently licked by the Pluto character. We succeeded in planting this false memory in a significant minority of our subjects. Or in Berkowitz's dissertation research, planting the false memory that the goofy character picked you up and started to carry you away from the family and you were extremely upset, succeeding in planting this false memory in a significant minority of subjects. And guess what? The critics said, maybe it really happened. Pedophiles like to go to work in places where there are lots of children, and maybe some pedophile went to get a job at Disney, dressed up in a Pluto outfit, and went around licking the ears of people while on the job. And so we knew really we had to rely on some findings that show that people will accept suggestions and develop false memories of things that would be impossible. That was the genesis of our doing the study, where we got people to believe and remember that on a childhood trip to Disney, they actually met and shook hands with Bugs Bunny. This is impossible because Bugs is a Warner Brothers character and would not be allowed at a Disney resort. And yet, after viewing this made-up doctored ad for Disney that featured Bugs Bunny, many of our subjects began to remember actually meeting Bugs Bunny at Disney. So more recently, I've moved into this related issue. If I plant a false memory in your mind, what repercussions does it have? I mean, does it affect your later thoughts, your later intentions, or even your later behaviors? So how are you going to study this? Whether false memories have repercussions. And one of our first studies, along with Dan Bernstein, who was then my postdoc, two former graduate students, Carol Laney and Aaron Morris, we decided, let's make people believe and remember that as children they got sick eating particular foods. See, the idea here is, if I make you think you got sick eating a particular food, like hard-boiled eggs or dill pickles, maybe later down the road you won't want to eat the food as much, and then I would be showing a consequence of having that false memory. We also developed a much more efficient way of planting false memories. Those old Lost in the Mall studies from the 90s, they were very inefficient. We had to talk to the mother of our subject. We had to make up the stories with the parents. We had to run the subjects one at a time. It was very labor intensive. But we now have ways of planting false memories in a whole group of people at one time. So here's how we do it in the food studies. You bring people into an experimental session, you get a whole bunch of data from them. Data about their interests in food, data about their personality. All of this is just to make what's going to happen later seem more credible. They come back a week later and we tell them, we fed all your data into our really smart computer program that determined that certain things happened to you when you were a child. And Johnny Jones, here's your personalized profile that the computer determined. Johnny doesn't realize that lots of other people are getting the identical profile. And he's told, you felt sick after eating a hard-boiled egg. It's embedded in a list of other items that we think are true of many kids. And Johnny, like all subjects, has to try to imagine these experiences or remember them or imagine them if he can't remember them. And later on, he's going to tell us what he wants to eat at a party where it's an outdoor afternoon party. He's gone for a swim. He's now hungry. He goes over to a table. There's all kinds of food on the table he can choose from. How likely are you to want to eat these various foods? It's a much longer list than the one I'm showing you, but embedded in that long list are the critical items, the hard-boiled eggs and dill pickles. So here's how much people want to eat hard-boiled eggs and dill pickles at this outdoor party if they haven't been given any false feedback at all. You can see they slightly prefer the hard-boiled egg, this preference rating, than the dill pickles, but we don't care about that. Here's how much people want to eat the foods if they were exposed to our suggestive manipulation, but they didn't buy it. They didn't develop a belief or memory. And we have ways of assessing that you can read about in the papers that are posted on my website. They didn't buy it. Here's how much people want to eat these foods if they were exposed to the manipulation and they fell for it. They don't want the foods as much. And I remember looking at these data. This is one of the great moments in the life of an experimental psychologist, where the graduate students come in with the Excel spreadsheets and the graphs, and they show you what the study is revealing. And I think, oh my gosh, it's really, I mean, they look like they're not wanting the food as much after they develop the false memory. If this would work with a fattening food, Just think about this. We could be on the brink of a new dieting technique. And so, after we'd shown that it was possible to plant a false memory and it had consequences, we set out to do it with a fattening food. And we did it with strawberry ice cream. The method was the same. Get information from people, have them come back a week later. We fed all your data into our really smart computer program that determines certain things happen to you as a child. And Mary, here's your personalized profile. Our really smart computers determined you felt ill after eating strawberry ice cream. Mary, like other subjects, has to elaborate on these various experiences that the computer is insisting happened. And then Mary tells us what she wants at a party. And on the average, here's how much people want strawberry ice cream if they were not given any false feedback at all. Here's how much they want it if they were given exposed to the manipulation, but they didn't develop a false belief or memory. And here's how much they wanted it if they were exposed to the manipulation. They don't want the strawberry ice cream as much. So we were pretty excited about this result. We published it in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. And I don't know whether it was because it was a fattening food or because we published it in the PNAS, which is the magazine of the National Academy of Sciences, and has a very good communication division that promotes the scientific findings that are published in its magazine. But this finding basically went all over the world and got into a whole bunch of newspapers. Our weekly news magazine, Time Magazine, published a whole page on the new mental diet. And they described the study, the strawberry ice cream study. I was very happy to see they published the caveats that I had tried to insist, but you never know if they're going to follow your suggestion. We don't know how long these effects are going to last. We see them in a single experimental session, but you want them to last if you're going to really be serious about this being some kind of dieting technique. At the end of the year, the New York Times Magazine, Sunday Magazine, published the 78 most innovative kind of scientific ideas of the year, all of science. And there, I know this is a brag, but was the false memory diet. And they too published the caveats. We don't know how long these effects are going to last, and we don't know whether the manipulation will be sufficiently powerful that it will enable the subject to withstand the incredible temptation of an actual bowl of strawberry ice cream put right in front of the subject. Well, we didn't know then, but we do know now because of several studies that have been published since then, one in the Netherlands with egg salad, and several in Canada with peach yogurt, showing that these effects do last and they affect actual eating behavior. People don't eat as many egg salad sandwiches when they're right in front of them. People don't eat as much peach yogurt when it's right in front of them. If you've planted a false memory that you once got sick on these foods as children. And just last month, we published our first study showing not just food, in a study headed by my former student, Seema Cliff-Asifi. We did the same thing with alcohol. So we plant a false memory that you got sick earlier in life drinking a vodka drink, and then we asked people about their preferences for various drinks, including vodka drinks. Here's how much they want a vodka drink if they weren't exposed to any feedback at all. Here's how much they wanted if they were exposed to the manipulation, but they didn't develop a false memory. And here's how much they wanted if they were exposed to the manipulation and they fell for it. They don't want it as much. And so at some point it was kind of natural for us to say, you know, if we can plant a getting sick memory in the minds of people and they want to avoid these foods or drink, I wonder if we could plant a warm fuzzy memory in the mind of people, let's say for a healthy food. And maybe we'd find they want to eat that healthy food more. And we did exactly that. We did it with asparagus. We planted a warm, fuzzy memory that you loved asparagus the first time you tried it. Later on, we asked people what they want to eat at Le Restaurant. Asparagus is on the menu. They tell us how much they want to eat, these various foods. And we did succeed in creating memories of having loved a food the first time you tried it. Those who bought into the manipulation wanted to eat more asparagus. And then we had a bunch of other studies just designed to try to tease apart the mechanism. What could be going on here that's leading from the false memory to the greater appreciation and love of this food. And it was around this time that when I saw this asparagus result that I thought, you know, I wish I could get my hands on a particular American citizen, do a little case study here, because now you wouldn't have known that he's well known for this, but our former President Bush is known to have not liked broccoli. And he once famously said, I do not like broccoli. I haven't liked it since I was a little kid and my mother made me eat it. And I am President of the United States. I am not going to eat any more broccoli. Well, we believe if we could just get our hands on the former president and ply him with our suggested manipulation, it would just be a matter of time before broccoli was hit one of his very favorite vegetables. Well, in the most recent years, we've tried answering a bunch of questions that we get from audiences like this, and that we ask ourselves about this phenomenon. Is there any way to distinguish a true memory from a false memory? You might think that people would be more emotional about their true memories than their false memories. And I've certainly heard therapists get on the stand and in these repressed memory cases where they're trying to bolster these claims of repression will say that they believe the accuser's story because of the emotion that she expresses as she describes her experiences. But in Carol Laney's terrific doctoral dissertation, she planted false memories, very rich false memories, and measured how emotional people were about them. And she found other people who had truly had these experiences and measured how emotional people were about them. And for every one of the three different types of memories that she planted or that were her critical items, the rated emotion was the same for the false memory and the true memory. You might be tempted to think, so just conclusion there, that false memories can be emotional, and emotion is no guarantee of memory accuracy. You might wonder, I don't know, maybe neuroimaging like fMRI or PET scans or some kind of neural signals might be different for the true memories and the false memories. And so in a recent collaboration with some colleagues who do neuroimaging, we created some false memories and true memories and then put people in a scanner and looked to see if the brain signals were different for the true and the false memories. And just in a nutshell, while we did find a little bit of statistical difference, where the true memories showed more activation in the visual cortex, where the false memories that were derived from an auditory input showed a little more activation in the auditory cortex, the overwhelming finding in this study is that these true memories and false memories are very similar in terms of neuroimaging. So we are a long, long way away from the kind of situation that the legal field might one day wish for, where you can take a single memory and then put the person into a brain scanner and reliably determine whether that's a true memory, an authentic one, or whether it's a product of some other process. You might think that true memories might persist longer than false memories. But in a recent study that we just published, where we came back to people a year and a half after they had reported some true memories and some false memories and asked about the persistence of the true memories shown in blue was equivalent to the persistence of the false memories that are shown here in red. You might wonder who is susceptible to these kinds of contaminations and conversely who is resistant. Well, I can tell you there are some statistical correlations. So in a recent study with Chinese collaborators, We looked at standard measures of intelligence, for example. In a misinformation study, we found that people who scored high in standard measures of intelligence, this is just a retrieval cue for me, were somewhat more resistant to these kinds of manipulations. And in terms of personality variables, in a separate paper, we have found that there are some personality variables that are associated with greater susceptibility. So if you look at the people in this study who are amongst the most susceptible to having their memories be contaminated, if they're low in cognitive ability and high in cooperativeness, you get that very highest point in terms of the most false memories. But I think we need to keep in mind when we're thinking about cognitive ability that despite the fact that we can find correlations, even the highest among us in terms of cognitive ability, the Hillary Clintons, the Mitt Romneys, and the Tony Blairs have shown us that they too can be susceptible to some kind of memory contamination. And so I'll just leave you with a few final remarks. We hope that this work is adding to our understanding of the malleable nature of memory, teaching us something that about how false memories develop. We're almost to the point where we could say we have a recipe for how to do this. The practical consequences, I think, are fairly obvious. I never thought that I would be getting into the business of looking at nutritional selection and influencing it, maybe making a dent in the obesity problem in our society. And of course, there are implications for legal cases. And one of the things that I have been thinking about is that along with this ability to this mind technology, where you can change what's in people's minds and control their behavior, comes some serious ethical considerations. Like, when should we use this kind of technology, if ever? And what kind of regulation or restrictions should we put on its use? So I'll leave you with this one take-home lesson. If I've learned anything from some 40 years of working on memory distortion, it's captured in this one phrase: just because the memory is expressed with confidence, with detail, with emotion, it doesn't mean that it's true. Thank you for listening.
I know that Elizabeth is pretty tired and ready to go and eat and have a drink, because she did an hour and a half before she came to Goldsmiths. She then did an interview for us, which will be appearing in a future magazine. And she's now just done an excellent lecture. So I'm just going to take 2 questions from the audience. So get your hands up quickly if you have a question. Anyone? Oh, you answered all their questions.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay.
Well, it's not really a very clearly thought out question, actually, but I was wondering.
Right, let's take another. No.
I was wondering about whether there's any implications for the use of the suggestibility test that we do sometimes, which is related to somebody's susceptibility to change their answers under pressure.
Are you talking about something like Good Johnson?
Yes, what I'm talking about.
Yeah, okay. Well, sometimes that test does correlate with susceptibility to some kinds of distortions. I'm not quite, I don't know whether I've. Do you feel comfortable kind of using it in an actual case and then deciding that this, if you gave it to Holly Ramona, for example, and she scored high versus low, what would you say? What would you be able to say? What would it add to the situation? I will tell you that in many cases that I am involved in these repressed memory cases, especially if these accusers end up, they do always, or virtually always have some kind of psychiatrist or psychologist as an expert witness who's a repression advocate, and some of them will give these tests, and I've seen that Gudjonsen test be given, and the expert will say, you see, she didn't even score very high in terms of the Gudjonsen test, and I you know, it doesn't matter that the memory's unsupported, that it came out bizarre, that there's no support for repression. But I have seen people try to use that test to bolster when they get a low score from the person who's doing the accusing. And it kind of worries me.
I'm going to take 2 more questions.
Okay. Okay.
Alistair, and then you, and then that's it.
I'm going to ask you to speculate a little bit, but just in terms of the history of false memory experiments, it seems that it's around a third of people who seem to be susceptible to false memories. Taking that in mind, and I know that it's kind of probably impossible to prove this within an experimental setting, do you think we all have false memories?
Well, the answer to the last thing is yes, I do. I think we all have false memories. I think we're all potentially susceptible. But keep in mind, that is a correct observation. And actually, somebody took the first, I think, 9 of these rich false memory studies and said, okay, what's the average we have here in terms of susceptibility? And it was about 30+%. So just as you've suggested. But remember, those are what you can accomplish with 2 or 3 suggestive interviews. What can you accomplish when you're going to a therapist with a sex abuse agenda week after week after week after year after year? So I think, just so much more opportunity, and the rates of susceptibility are going to be potentially a lot higher.
Just to add the final question. That question was asked by Alistair. I know he'll want me to give a plug to a project that we're involved in called the False Memory Archive. If you have any things that feel like memories, but you know they can't possibly be true, we'd very much like to hear from you. Let us know. Just type in False Memory Archive into Google and you'll get the website. And the final question.
I'm not a professional in the field, so excuse the naivety of it, but I think most people have done what I've done, try to remember your earliest childhood experiences. Yeah. And I find that if I think about it, what I'm remembering is my previous memory of it.
Yes.
And if I've told the story to somebody, my wife said I always embroider these stories, the embroidery becomes part of the memory, and I can't tell truth from fiction now. Could this be related to what you've been talking about?
Well, I think so, absolutely. Yes, that when people are asked what is your earliest memories, I mean, most people can't come up with anything before the age of about 3, and many people have an earliest memory that is something that occurred a lot older than that. But how many of these are really scenes from photographs that are in the family scrapbook or stories that have been told? Just like Mitt Romney's memory of going to the Golden Jubilee.
You again for a fantastic
Okay.